And I'll make
Yeah.
Veronica a host. Okay. Hi, everyone. Greetings and welcome. It is the virtual Dalcroze meetup. I think is this the 40th? The 40th one, which is insane. We could have just squished all of these together into one work week and we'd be done with it. Who needs 2 years? But it took us 2 years. We just this last week celebrated 2 years of the virtual Dalcroze meetup. And I want to thank my co-conspirator, Veronica Levski, and our dear friend Emma Shubin for mounting all of this with me. Honestly, we've been having a blast. It's been such a rewarding element of the last 2 years, and we're just really thankful to have everyone together. We have a smaller group today, so we're going to make some short, some small adjustments to some of the plans, and we'll see if anybody else appears while we get going. But before we go any further, I'll introduce Veronica. And Veronica, I waited though till she put something in her mouth. If you all haven't clicked on the agenda that's in the chat, you might do that just so we could see a little bit. Veronica, did you want to say hi before we?
Hello. Yes. Yeah, we're happy to have you all here, and it's very cool that it's been 2 years of the BDM. It feels like it's flown by. So,
and actually, a bunch of the people right here with us have been with us nearly from the beginning, have been a part of a lot of these. So we're really happy to see all 4 of you and to be together. Well, anytime that we've had a smaller crowd, we've reminded ourselves that we record these and we know that they are watched in the in-between. So we're gonna go both for our own edification here and for posterity, we will record and see what sort of conversation we can get into. We normally, break out into breakout rooms to introduce ourselves, but I think we should just not, and we should just say hi right here. So I'm gonna introduce, I'm Steve. I don't normally get to participate in this part. I usually monitor the list of who's coming in late. So what do we say? Who are you, where are you, and who do you teach? Is that it? It's just 3 things. I think I always think it's the 4th thing. So I'm Stephen Neely. I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I mostly teach university students. So I work at the Carnegie Mellon University School of Music. And I have every semester about 100 students who are mostly freshman or sophomore performance majors. Mixed in there are some composers and some electronic musicians and some music technology folk. And then usually a handful of students from all over campus who don't have to be majoring or minoring in music. About a fifth of my students are just any other major from across campus. But the core of my students and definitely the curriculum that I have built up over the years is based and pointed directly at the performers who are not trying to become eurythmics teachers, but are just trying to understand music better, trying to be, we say, deeper musicianship. And so that's actually the kind of point of the day. So that's who I teach. I hand it to Veronica.
Hi, I'm Veronica Levski, and I live in the Boston area, and I teach kids as young as 18 months, and then all the way up to teenagers, and I also have adult students, and I teach Dalcroze group classes and private flute and piano lessons, and I recently started teaching adult chamber music, which has been super fun. So I have a couple, like a trio of older adults who are all just like so in love with this part of their week, and it's a blast. And yeah, that's about me. I'll pass it on to Shoshana.
Hi, I'm Shoshana. I'm an oboe player. I'm finishing my master's at McGill, so at least for the next couple months. I don't teach anybody, but I like hanging out with the Dalcroze crew.
Very good. Do you aspire to teach anyone, or do you aspire to?
I expect to teach at some amount in my life, in some capacity, at least oboe, if not something. I'd like to go further with the Dalcroze stuff. It's just a matter of when that works out. At some point.
Yeah. Shoshana is, among many things, a candidate for the certificate at Carnegie Mellon's Marta Sanchez Doctors Training Center, which was all
Which is
started
probably,
in earnest before COVID hit, and then now nobody knows what's happening. So we're
yeah, doesn't it disappear after 5 years or something? Then
yeah,
you
the
have to
Carnegie
keep
Mellon
doing it.
policy is we want you to finish it within 5, but if you're in good communication, all sorts of things can happen. So we should, I have letters to go out to everybody who got stalled by the pandemic. So we'll keep going. Hand it over to someone, Shoshana.
Oh yeah. How about Teo?
Hi, I'm Teo. I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, right next to Stephen Ely. I plan to teach teenagers and be a singer.
Very good.
And I'm handing it off to Selma.
Hi, I'm in Toronto, Canada. I'm retired from my long life of teaching at York University. I taught in the Department of Dance for many years, and of course taught mostly dance students, but also a lot of music students and generally fine arts students. My work is to do with Dalcroze histories. I'm very interested in the people who have taught this work or who have been influenced by it in their artistic work or in their teaching or life work, whatever it may be. The current work I do, I still actually like to find ways to do little sort of bite-sized bits of teaching. So I'm looking forward to sharing a part of a session with Changfeng Lin in April. We're sort of planning this date now because we both can get together on doing that for a VDM on April 11th. So that will be a micro.
We are so excited that you said yes and the date worked. So all of you who've been asking about when are we going to learn about those Dalcroze breathing exercises, that's the date, April 11th. So thank you, Selma and Changfeng.
Dorita, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Dory Berger. I'm an alumni of Carnegie Mellon's Fine Arts Music Department as a student of Dalcroze with Marta Sanchez. So, you know, how many centuries ago. And I'm basically retired. I'm living in Durham, North Carolina, but I'm working rhythmic movement classes with Parkinson's people and find that the rhythm is a great influence on the movement. And I do a lot of activities as I remember them from my own Dalcroze training. And I have to say, I personally have been very, very influenced by Dalcroze, and I profess everything I can about Dalcroze and rhythm. And later on in our discussion today, I may share a story of a performance I went to yesterday, and Dalcroze kept coming into my mind, a performance of the Mendelssohn piano trio that needed a lot of Dalcroze training. So thank you.
Sounds like a horror film is what it sounds like, but we'll see. We'll see what the story is actually about. Rebecca, will you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Rebecca Hampel. I live in Austin, Texas. I primarily teach voice or have taught voice. I'm a movement specialist, so I've taught movement and music classes to people from, preschool all the way through adults. I'm not sure what else we're saying. I studied at Lucy Moses 100 years ago with Anne and Ruth before she was Dr. Ruth. And I came to Dalcroze as a movement teacher. My teacher was the teacher, Philip Burton was the teacher at Lucy Moses, and I substituted for him because he was off doing something for a month, and finally found my people in the Dalcroze world, and it was delightful and wonderful to find it, and I just am so happy to be involved in it.
Very good. Well, it's so nice to have everybody here together, and even with a small crowd, I think this is a rich group, and so I'm sure we'll have no trouble filling up the remainder of our time together. Well, actually, I'm sorry, before I go on, Veronica, I think the agenda has some announcements.
Yes, so we have a masterclass with Jack Stevenson this Saturday, and if you live in Europe, I think it'll be Saturday evening for you, and then if you live in Asia, it'll be Sunday morning. So it's going to be really exciting. I haven't ever met Jack, so I'm excited for that. I think Stephen was able to speak more about his teaching. And then later on this year, we also have a masterclass with Maria Luisa de Alessandro, who goes by Isa, and her class is on April 23rd or 24th, depending on where you live.
Maria, Isa is centered in Italy. She's part of the Dalcroze Italy band of teachers, and they have actually a really rich culture there of Dalcroze teaching. We had our very first masterclass was also from Dalcroze Italy, and so we are really excited to have Isa join us. She's been a friend of mine for many years, and I've just always loved being in the room with her. And then the work with Jack is centered also in Pennsylvania in the United States. He's a diploma holder and he can do anything. Jack's very multifaceted and has been a favorite teacher of many people for many years. But he spends a fair bit of time specializing around solfege and improvisation, but that's in no way his only thing. He's also has a very big heart for plastique animé. And I heard a rumor that in addition to what he initially told us he was going to present, which I think is still going to be there, something having to do with improvisation and solfege, he's also going to spend a little bit of time with the rhythmic modes. And so if you don't know this terminology, you'll definitely want to sign up for the masterclass. It's a really important, useful set of ideas, and Jack has a very specific way of teaching to it and explaining what he means by the rhythmic modes. So I'm excited. I've heard him present that before, and I'm excited to get a refresher. So lots happening indeed. The last two meetups, guest numbers 38 and 39, have been sort of around this idea of adult education or adult musicianship. And we've kind of pivoted or positioned the discussion maybe falsely, honestly, maybe a little bit falsely against childhood education, that is the work that we do with children, and teacher training, which of course assumes adults, but also assumes a very specific set of hurdles at the end of the term. And so I hope no one playing back any of these conversations would think that we were trying to argue that these are not in many ways overlapping attentions. So hopefully all of our teaching is musicianship. That would be my claim, and I hope would be everybody's claim. So we don't in any way want to imply that if you're in a teacher training program or if you run a teacher training program, that you're only teaching to the test and there's no actual musicianship going on. I would never say that. I don't believe that. And likewise, when we're working with children, that there isn't musicianship every minute of that time as well. In fact, most of us who are doing teacher training, even when we encounter students who have no interest in working with kids, we'll often still force them to find some time to work with the kids, because there's a kind of learning and a kind of attention that is built up in us when we have a chance to interact with new students who have fewer preconceived ideas about what is right and what is wrong. And it opens just so many doors. All of that said, though, there are some situations in the world where children aren't in the room, and the notion of earning a certificate or a license has nothing to do with the conversation. And so it's been a fun provocation the last couple of VDMs to think, well, if no one's talking about a certificate, a piece of paper with a Dalcroze title accreditation on it, and if there aren't children and children's sort of games that need to be learned and played and managed, then what are we teaching? And what opportunities are at our disposal? As soon as we are teaching toward an exam, as adults working toward the certificate, well, then it is in some ways by necessity going to guide a lot of the conversation. But what if we didn't have that? Now what would we focus on? And so we've spent a little bit of time to ask the last two meetups about musicianship as a title, and try to get everybody talking about it. So today I'd like to build on that. So I've got a little bit of opening statement. So here's the plan. I've got an opening statement, then Veronica has a provocation for us, and then I have as much time as we want to have. We can do a couple little exercises or think about a couple exercises, and then we'll have some discussion. So that's the plan. You ready? Here we go. Under what I tell my students, and I don't know that everybody agrees with this, these definitions, but what I tell my students is that there are three legs to the music making stool. The one is literacy, a second one is technique, and a third one, see if I can get my fingers to read on this white wall behind me, musicianship. So that these are three different poles or three different axes that we hope to find some attention and skills in all three. So if you're not familiar with somebody comparing those three things as not being the same thing, I'll give you just 10 seconds to think about, well, what would be the difference if you had to define them now? What's the difference between the three? What counts as technique that is not musicianship or literacy? What counts as literacy that is not technique or musicianship? And then what is musicianship that is not specifically either of the other two? You want to answer this together? Let's go. There's only 6, 7 of us. Let's raise a hand or just unmute. Tell me which one. Let's start with the what I think is probably the easiest of them, which might be, well, which one do you think's easy? So Teo, you've got a hand up. What's the easiest one, the simplest one to define? What do you think?
What sounds the easiest is literacy, which is the little black marks on the piece of paper. It's being able to read the little black marks on the piece of paper and understand what all of the notes and the time signatures and the accents mean.
Good, and I'll agree. I think literacy has to do with vocabulary and anything you can name. So if you can name it, then that would count as a part of your literacy. And so there is music reading literacy, which are the little black dots on the page, and all those Italian markings and in what different sort of like commas and time signatures. We would also claim that there's a kind of literacy in being able to read an open orchestral score. Again, recognizing what each of those different lines are pointing at or trying to define. On your individual instrument, there's also literacy involved on the instrument, knowing the names of certain keys or certain little valves, or understanding things you can name, like vocabulary words and markings, I think would all fit under literacy. Does anybody have another example of literacy that we haven't mentioned just now?
Theory.
Yeah,
Theory.
so any kind of music theory. So when you look at, for instance, a chorale, and you can go, oh, don't you see that they didn't write it out with explicitly, but that's a G major chord, and G major happens to be the 5, the dominant in this particular key that we're in. All of that would fall under literacy. Anybody have another one that would fit that?
I think Rebecca did.
Rebecca, did you have another?
Well, I just wonder about if it expands into something like literature, sort of knowing the performance practices for your instrument, or would that necessarily be maybe more technique,
well, I guess
or is there kind of a crossover there?
I think there's probably a crossover there, which will probably, it may cross over into both of the remaining things. So we'll have to think as we define them. I have found it a little bit convenient to try to keep the lines as sharp as I can keep them when I'm trying to make the initial introduction, but as we would push this conversation into even slightly more advanced terms, I think we'll see that in some cases we have things that overlap. So I think that's a pretty good setup for what we would count as literacy. Now, I'll note for you right off the bat that you don't need literacy to make music. And so we can make music and not understand a thing with vocabulary words or some specific notational system or some specific tradition. You wouldn't need any of that for music to exist or to appreciate music. It's not necessary. And so, but it is one of the things that we often encounter in music instruction. So there's literacy. What counts as technique? What do you think that is?
Well, that's the one I was excited about. I was thinking about how in all my flute lessons recently, I've been working with students on like directing their air for where the note needs to be resonant. And like some students just like aren't even aware that their lips need to move. So they're just frozen. And then they have like a nice sound on one note, and all the other ones, the further away you get from them, they just like start sounding really fuzzy. And they're like, I don't know what's wrong with me or my flute. And I'm like, there's nothing wrong with you. You're just not moving your lips. So like that to me is an example of technique.
Absolutely. So technique is usually all of the specific things that help your instrument make the sound you want it to make. It has to do with, and your instrument can be your flute or your piano, but it can also be the body. It could be the body as a eurythmic student would have technique. Your body as a dancer would also have technique. Your body as a conductor would have technique. So in each case, it's trying to get the instrument, whatever you name as the instrument, to behave as you would like it to behave. And we all know that our instrument, whatever one it is, they're all a bit unwieldy and they don't always do what we want. They don't always do what we want them to do. And so it's your technique that in many ways will help you manage the playing of the instrument. Veronica?
Just had a quick question there. Like, do you distinguish between the cognitive understanding of what the technique actually is, and then like also the practicing and rehearsal to get the coordination in the body so that it's there for you and available? I
think, I mean, these are all, again, as we just get even just a half a step more advanced in the descriptions, then it all gets a little, more open. I think as I'm making this initial sort of rant here about these three words, the part of the technique that I think is most useful is the technique you possess or that understand enough to desire. But recognizing that, so if you are just a natural and you have a flute student who doesn't know why they are able to keep all the notes buzzing beautifully, but they just do it, then that still counts as technique, even if they can't word it or can't teach it to somebody else. And we encounter that on, I think, probably every instrument has things that some people just do easily, and they don't know exactly how and why. And then probably almost all of those same students, along with everybody else, then have to be taught elements of their technique to either play more healthy or to play more efficiently, or to keep it, more resonant or more beautiful or what have you. And so posture, breath, are two hot ones, that seem to hit almost everybody's instrument, and then things like embouchure or placement of X, placement of the hand, placement of the lip, placement of the tongue, placement of the soft palate. All of those are the types of sort of manipulating the instrument to get it to behave the way you would like it to behave, are all things that fall under this element of technique. And I'll say, does anybody have any more they want to throw out for technique? Then I'll just add to this and point out again that actually you don't actually have to have much or much of any technique to make music. Good technique permits greater expressiveness. That's what it permits. So virtuosity is quite often a virtuosity of technique. And what it permits you is a wider range of repertoire. And so you can be amazingly proficient, gorgeous music maker, but in a very narrow band. And we know artists who are that. They're like the very best thing at what they do, but they do this. And then we know other people who can just seem to do anything. And quite often what permits them that flexibility is a greater technique. And so you can make music on a toy piano, but it's a very limited kind of music that you can make on that toy piano with one octave and clinky sounds and no dynamic range. And so the greater piano permits a greater technique, requires a greater technique. And then with the capacity for that, you can then start to become more expressive. And then the third leg of my tripart here is what I'll call musicianship. And now we're just going to take a minute to try to define this term musicianship if I force you to compare it to the other two things. So I'll just start by saying that the word musicianship is a broad term and probably everybody uses it in some manner, but I don't assume everybody is as strict about the usage as what I'm sort of forcing you into in this conversation. So if we say musicianship is not literacy and it's also not technique, then what is it? Anybody want to jump in?
Communication.
Good. Another?
Phrasing.
Okay, good. Is that Kathleen? Did you unmute?
Applying your musical phrases in a way that honors the intent of the composer.
Good. I like that. Anybody got another? So if you can't tell, this is one of these things that I could easily spend the next half hour and we'd have nothing left to do as we go. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit in the rant and just tell you, I think one good working definition for musicianship is everything that is not literacy and technique and that is interpretive. And so if there's a choice to be made in the room about this or that, there's a good chance that that's going to fall under the heading of musicianship. And so this is the sort of breathing life into whatever is the piece that we're, whatever the selection is that we're about to do. These are interpretive choices and often choices that are made in the moment that contribute now to the piece being more than just a dry succession of notes, which your literacy can make happen. If I just know I'm supposed to hit this note and then that note and then that note, and then if I play the three notes, have I done my job of making music or have I not? And in many cases, I think the advanced musician will say, well, actually, there's more to it than just doing the thing you were told to do. You're to bring something of yourself to it. And so it becomes interpretive. And then all of a sudden, we're trying to figure out, well, what is me? What does it mean to bring me to it? What does it mean to be involved in choices? Teo?
Yeah, musicianship is the fun part of music. I remember I did a workshop and I was singing this song in operetta as the tenor, and she said, so walk it. And I had the most boring walk across the room. And she's like, no, where's your music going? My music is going up and down the scales to make the soprano sound good. No, where is the music going? And so by the end of that workshop, I had like a pirate ferry on a lightning storm. Like the music was going to a place, and I was taking it there. The musicianship is it's not the technique of how to make my voice go or the literature of how to read the words. It's your choices as an artist of how are you going to take it there.
Very nice. Hold on a second. Very nice indeed. I don't have a very clean definition of this third word. But I will tell you that it is, maybe in all cases, the things that contribute to our musicianship are interpretive. And so there usually isn't only one answer. There's a range of answers, and it's your being aware of those answers and then having some ability or some skill over them to enact them that contribute to your interpretation or your musicianship as displayed in the piece. I'm gonna, Veronica, if it's okay with you, I'm going to skip over job descriptions because I just see like the time flying here. And I'm going to show you. Oh, I got to find the thing. Here it is. There we go. So here's a little list that I've been playing with for a little while now. This is not exhaustive in any way. and isn't the only right answer. In fact, you might decide that some of these things aren't things at all, or don't belong on this list, or actually the same thing as some other thing. But if I can just really quickly lead you through some ideas that I believe fall under the heading of musicianship. We can maybe try to get into any one of these. The first one is willful aesthetic, which is the ability to will yourself to feel. And this is something that is deep in the Dalcroze work. If you think about, I don't know if you all know your do to do scales under the solfege heading, but there is a series of exercises, of historic exercises in the Dalcroze work called the do to do scales. And the gist of it is, here, I'll play for you a pitch. Now sing for me a major scale or a minor scale or some scale up and back starting on this pitch. And so that pitch becomes the tonic. We assume it's a tonic, it's the first pitch. And of course, then we just sing the scale up and back. And then the do to do scales say, well, what if I tell you that this pitch actually isn't the tonic? What if I tell you it's the third degree of a harmonic minor scale? Can you make that pitch inside of you feel like the third degree of a harmonic minor scale? And what we realize as we go through this exercise is that I have to twist my innards. I can't feel the same way as I felt a moment before, because the role of this particular pitch means something different than it did before, even though it's the exact same frequency. When what we start to understand is that this pitch has desires or has momentum built into it, depending on how I place it in whatever the scale is I'm about to play. And so there's a whole series of exercises from Jacques Dalcroze that have to do with the do to do, where really the way that I will recharacterize it is we are willing ourselves to feel one way or another. And as we develop that flexibility, we're starting to adjust our musicianship, is what I will tell you. We play that same exercise with rhythm, where I can give you a pattern of notes without bar lines. And then I can say, oh, let's just dryly read the pattern of long notes and short notes. And now if I change the bar lines around them, or I change the beamings and I group these two notes together, not those two notes together, I can change the role of any individual note, and as a result, change its overall feel. I can will it to feel like a downbeat, or will it to feel like an upbeat, or will it to feel like something on the in-between, just by moving things around. So mathematically, it's the exact same math, but I can will it to feel other. And by building up flexibility, by moving beamings or moving bar lines or changing time signatures, but keeping the math of it the same, I can make it feel otherwise. I can change the way that it feels. And so we have a whole bunch of exercises based around this idea of willing oneself to feel. And when we get into those games, I think that we're playing around with what I'll just call one aspect of deep musicianship, which is the willful aesthetic. Weakest link is this idea that you can rank your willful experience. So in order for there to be a weakest link, there has to be multiple links or multiple things happening at once. And weakest link is the ability to prioritize one thing over another, meaning that something is the weakest link and it gets pushed to the end. And if it's going to break, it'll be the thing that breaks. In automobile design, there are crumple zones in modern cars. If you get into a head-on collision in a Mini Cooper, the Mini Cooper is designed where the engine will actually shoot underneath your feet in a head-on collision rather than be pressed into your lap as the driver. And that's because there's a weakest link in the carriage of the Mini Cooper. It's designed to break over there, not over here. And so as Dalcroze students, when we are doing any kind of polyrhythm or multi-layering, multitasking, which is bread and butter of our work, we do lots and lots of watch me do this while I do that, and I do this other thing at the same time. The weakest link is the ability to rank the arrangement of variables so that I value something more importantly, more richly, more valuable than something else. And so we'll do at least one of these weakest link exercises with you here before I'm done today. So I won't talk about it more. The yearn toward and away from is the musicianship attention. In this case, I'll call it more an attention than a skill. It's the musicianship attention, often practiced or understood in the anacrusis, crucis, metacrucis discussions, which just says that our music's always moving. It's always moving forward or toward. In my teaching, I talk about the yearn toward. And so again, I could play the dry succession of pitches as some score and wonder, well, my literacy was right and my technique permitted me to hit them, so aren't I done? And then as Teo said, yeah, but where is it moving? And so that requires an interpretive choice that says, well, actually, I'm trying to get it to feel as though it's moving toward or yearning toward or away from some moment in time. And so until we have discovered that or layered that into our experience, then I would claim that your musicianship is shallow. And what we're trying to find is a deeper musicianship, or that is a greater understanding that our music is more than just notes and more than just a lip that permits me to make notes, but it's an actual bodied yearning toward and away from instance. Attentional hierarchy is actually a similar version to weakest link, and I'm feeling out of time, so I'm gonna move ahead. Temporal coherence is the awareness of the one versus the awareness of the subdivision, which is a choice, and again, an interpretive choice. Are the notes in front of you in what single bar phrases? Or maybe are they in 2-bar phrases? Or quite often what looks like two 2-bar phrases, someone else could interpret as a single 4-bar phrase. And so do you have an awareness of the larger space versus the smaller space? Or is the only way that you are getting through the score is through your 16th note literacy, where you just feel every next 16th note is the next most important thing. And so as we, again, think about our musicianship, we are trying to rank what coheres, what notes or passages or bars do we want to sort of collect, and what do we want to break apart into smaller bits? And this is, again, interpretation. And so again, a skill or an awareness of, oh, actually, I have multiple ways to will myself to feel this bar. I can feel this bar as 16th note gestures, or as 8th note gestures, or as quarter note gestures, or as single bar or 2-bar or 6-bar. These are all ideas of what do I will myself to cohere. And then the last one that I'll give you is this idea of ensemble as empathy, where it's really just the difference between kinesthesia and the fancy word is kinesthesia. So kinesthesia is your awareness of your own movement. It's your, I feel my motion. That's the kinesthetic. And so it's not only that I'm moving, but that I'm aware of, or I feel, or I experience myself moving. That's kinesthesia. And kinesthesia is the experience of collective movement. So I feel moving with you, or I feel the motion of your piano playing or of your violin playing. And so I can move with you. So anytime we move together, overtly in a crazy eurythmics class, or covertly maybe feeling the motion inside my body at a concert where I'm seated and you're playing, those are both examples of the kinesthetic. And so having the awareness of motion and the feeling of motion solely and collectively, I will also count among examples of deep musicianship. And so there's a rant about all of that. We need far more than 20 minutes, I'm sure, to unpack all of that. But I'll just give you some things to think about. So can we just do a thing or two simple?
Of course.
Again, the focus of the sharing today is to try to think what can we do if the only goal is just, let's think about our own musicianship. And so what sorts of things could we practice? And I'll tell you that a lot of the teaching that I do, which again are with these performance students, yes, Rebecca will definitely share that. The work that I do, none of my students, or almost none of my students, are thinking about becoming eurythmics teachers of any age. They just want to play the violin better. They just wish their clarinet, did more of the things they wanted it to do, and that they could compete in either in big auditions or in just making outstanding music with their colleagues. And so we spend a lot of our time on these types of conversations, and then we use the Dalcroze exercises, and even more so exercises inspired by the classic Dalcroze exercises to just try to dig down in any of these. So here's a simple one that might work well with this crowd. And we can say, actually, I'm going to put my little thing back up because you can then think which of these is in this very simple exercise. So one of the things that I think is really exciting about teaching adults for musicianship is that it doesn't have to be a eurythmics demo class. It can instead just be a class or an experience. Darn it, I keep trying to adjust my window here, sorry. It can just be an experience that we have together, and it doesn't have to be like this classic Dalcroze thing. So if you can do this seated, but you can also do it standing. I'm going to stand just to show you, but you can do it either. But I'll demonstrate better if I'm standing, I think. That was no better. 16 is too low. Okay. So, I stand here for my Shoshana and Teo and Veronica will recognize Margaret Morrison 119. And so if I stand here, and let's just assume that that my meter is 3/4. So I have enough literacy to understand what is 3/4. And if I'm in 3/4, can you just stand and conduct a 3 pattern? And you can do it with me or at a different tempo than me. And honestly, I don't care. With my students, I don't care a lot if they were to only maybe use one arm for a little while, although I'll tell them if you were, then you should compensate with the other arm. And we spend most of our times with 2 arms, but kind of in a pattern like a conductor on a podium. So there's my 3 pattern. Now the question as the Dalcrozian, as the eurythmics teacher is, what do you feel? Did you feel it as 3 or did you just do it as 3? And that's a really critical question when we think about musicianship. So let's do it again. And would you not only conduct the 3, but would you rock your weight on the beat? And so I'm not twisting my upper body. My body's pretty much stable, but it's almost like I'm doing a really low grade march in place. So I'm not actually bending my knee. I'm just lifting my heel off the floor and I push it into the floor, push it into the floor, heel into the floor, heel into the floor, heel into the floor. Now, the Dalcrozian, the eurythmics teacher, believes you can't not feel that. That's what I believe. I believe that if you actually rock with your heel in the floor, it forces you to feel a shift of weight, a shift of weight, a shift of weight. And it's a much heavier or deeper feel than just this. So the swinging of arms in front is actually a lighter aesthetic than the heel into the floor. And so can you now pair the 2 up? And just every time your arm swings, can you get a heel in the floor, heel in the floor, heel in the floor? And maybe it'll seem a little distracting because the first downbeat was maybe on the left, and then all of a sudden the next downbeat is on the right. And for some people, that's a slight disconnect. But I'll just ask you to think of it less about right, left, and more like shift, 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 almost like you are walking. And we can play the game walking, of course, as well. But just standing in place, if I conduct and sway and sway and sway and sway and sway and sway. And so we've got this opening. And just that alone, actually, there's a lot that is already going on. So now all of a sudden, I have you doing 2 things at once. It couldn't be simpler. We're doing 2 things at once, but we could look over at our little list and think, well, what do you want it to feel like? Are you aware of it feeling? And do you have any, this idea of, well, there's actually twice of these are in here. So we'll talk about that in a second. The attentional hierarchy is, are you paying more attention to the heaviness in your feet or more attention to the arm? And just if you could just be aware, you don't even have to be able to flip it. I'll tell you that what I'm trying to get my students to notice is that heaviness into the floor. And then a second level is to organize it over 3, rather than to think it's in 3 and don't forget to walk. And so I want you to feel pulse as heavy, and then organize the pulse every 3, which is what a secondary attention, not the primary attention. And then there's a third attention here, which is the yearn toward, which is already being practiced, or the opportunity is already here, which is this idea of the difference between what feels like a downbeat and out and what feels like an upbeat. And so generally we would think, oh, the downbeat, that's my heaviness. And then this is, I always say, this is stability and strength. This is, hey, get out of the way. And this is my upbeat or my lift or my suspension, which is only holding to get me back to the heaviness of the downbeat. And so when we build in this simple conduct and sway, there is then a yearn toward into here and there. And I rise and I'm not done. And if I really have my hierarchy in place, this feels unresolved until I give it to there. And then I have it again. And so as soon as we start to build that idea of the yearning toward and recognizing that I can change what I pay attention to, There's a lot going on and we haven't even done anything. All we've done is conducted and swayed a little bit. And now I'll ask you to do the following. Can you, and stay muted for the moment, can you do the conduct and sway, and can you just sing yourself a little melody in 3/4? And so out, for instance, if I just say, "Tiam di dam dan da di 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 din da da di dam di dam dam tiam tiam tia da dan di da di dum di dum di di." And now you sing some other song. You lean in. Right? And now I'll just tell you the kinds of things that pop up. And I play 30 versions of just that little game where we're conducting and we're swaying what we conduct and now improvise over it. And so I play many variations on that basic model with my adult students. And what we find is that many of the things on my list start to pop up. The kinds of mistakes that happen are very often musicianship mistakes. The literacy part of it is only really being challenged if I tell you, sing these rhythms, not those rhythms, or this key, not that key, or these pitches, not those pitches. If I let it be general as just now, literacy is hardly a thing. We need to be literate to know what is 3 and what is 3/4 versus 9/8. So there's a little literacy there. And then I do lots of literacy challenges where I'll sing these over these rhythms, not those rhythms. But it isn't a requirement. And then the technique, there's a little bit of technique of getting my body to behave, getting it to do what I want it to do. And so there's some literacy between knowing that beat 2 goes out rather than beat 2 goes in. And there's technique in getting my low part of my body to line up with the top part of my body, which is totally a thing. I have students regularly, quite commonly, who are like, I see what you just told me to do, and now watch me do it. And all of a sudden, their body gets separated from their arms, which I think is fascinating. It's actually one of my it happens all the time. And every time I'm a little excited, although sad for my student, but I'm a little excited because I'm like, there, did you catch it? You are out of sync with yourself. So how in the world are you going to be in sync with your conductor if you can't even be in sync with yourself? And so then we try again, and we're trying to align my feels with my feels. And that to me is profound work, is deep musicianship. We're just getting ourselves aligned, let alone trying to align with our neighbor. I think this would be fun. I'm going to make you, hold on, let me get out of here. Stop share. I'm going to send you to the quickest breakout room. Everybody gets 60 seconds to each of you sing 4 phrases in 3/4 for your neighbor. Conduct and sway and sing. And you can do it standing as I was, or you can do it seated. And I think all of you should try. Ready? And here we go. I'll call you right back. Just 30 seconds each. Rebecca is here with me. You want to sing with me, Rebecca? Go.
Okay, so Rebecca was like holding the phone in one hand because she like couldn't prop it up, and she was conducting with the other hand. And as she was swaying, her body stayed still, but the background swayed behind her.
So good.
Like a TikTok like blogger, you know, like it had that vibe.
So crazy. So crazy. Before we finish this up, did I put the little list of musicianship skills in the chat? Did it appear for you or not? Because you were out. All right, let me see if I can get it to come in again. So did you have a chance to sing for each other? And does anybody, just with that littlest clip of an exercise, any reflections on how was that? Any thoughts?
I really liked what you said about the heels and the weight and like the difference between upper body conducting versus whole body. that was really helpful to have those words to guide what to pay attention to.
I'm all about the sway. I have, and it wasn't taught to me. It wasn't part of my training. It was something I discovered along the way. Actually, it came out of teaching inner city high school students who were great kids, but not interested in eurythmics and hardly interested in most of the things that I was doing. But really, a lot of them were very interested in the music of their church. They grew up in a gospel inner city church culture, and boy, could those kids sing if you just had the right repertoire that they wanted to sing. And man, could they feel it, like they were feeling it deep, like real deep musicians. And one of the things that's built into a lot of those settings is this idea of the gospel sway, where they take a step and then they heel to heel, and then step and heel to heel, and step and heel to heel, and step and heel to heel. And if you grew up in that culture, you do it effortlessly and never mess it up. And if you didn't grow up in that culture, it's crazy watching all the people who didn't grow up in that church mess it up, because people get screwed up so quick. It's just not intuitive to everybody who hasn't practiced it or grown up in it. And so once I realized that 3/4 of my room did that effortlessly, I was like, well, pow, we got all kinds of things we can do now, because we can just base this on what you already know. And then for the kids who couldn't do it, well, obviously there was an immediate challenge for them. And for the students who could do it, it gave us a root, a core to build off of. And then we did a handful of exercises with that exact gesture. And by the way, if you want to look cool while doing that gesture, barely move. That's the trick. The trick is barely move. Do not pick up your knee. Do not over exaggerate. How minimally can you make that motion happen? And all of a sudden you start to look a little cool. And then if you want to look as cool as the kids, the cool kids. And then once we established that we are good at that, then I was able to, well, what other sways could we do? And so we invented other ways to sway, and ended up with the main primary one that I use all the time is just the simple sway that I gave you that doesn't have the foot together. It's just right and just left, and it's always super low, which is actually the exact same attention of walking. And so whenever we walk in the room as eurythmics people, we're trying to build that same attention, a low shift of weight that is felt deeply in the body. You can't skid across the floor and not feel the shift of weight. You're not a bowling ball that somehow can get across the floor without having to lift yourself up and bring yourself back down. What is essential, profound in the walk that we use from class 1 is that it tosses the body up like my upbeat, and it yearns toward the downbeat or the heaviness in the next moment. And then when we're trying to do, in my little list, again, temporal coherence, we have this model in the small gates of walking, and then we can take that same sensation, that bodied understanding of heavy light, and now what happens if I feel it over twice as much space? What if I feel it over 5 times as much space? What if I feel it smaller and larger? It's all the same gesture, which you're intimately aware of in walking, and if you get good at the sway, you can notice it in the sway as well. And then how interesting to try to do other stuff while doing that, and how easily we can sort of get out of sync. Any other comments or thoughts about singing for your neighbor?
Well, Dorita, she uses it for her, may I use your name and example, Dorita? Uses it for Parkinson's patients for musical therapy. And I think that's wonderful because the coordination is lost and so much can be gained in addition to musicianship in the healing process or the well-being, overall well-being of those patients. So I think that's great.
Thank you.
We're crazily, we're about at time. Things go so quick around here. I think I'll just try to highlight, first of all, that I think of that teeny exercise as, first of all, as teeny. I think of it as not a classic Dalcroze exercise that we're going to encounter in every classroom that we do. And at the same time, I think of it as deeply Dalcrozian. I think that it is multi-layered. I think it is forward moving. I think that improvisation is legitimate in it. I don't think we're not improvising. I think we're absolutely improvising as much as any master improviser at the piano or whatever. I think we're absolutely improvising. And then we have just 100 opportunities to mess around with this now as a root basic exercise. We can make it mobile across a room. We can do it in place. I can do it with neighbors where we trade bars, or we sing over top of each other, or we just listen, or we echo, or we follow. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to do it. I can do it all orally. I can look for visual elements. I could make it all visual. So the same basic idea, but look for a way to sort of body it in a kind of gesture base could, be the direction that we're trying to head. We can play around with the vocabulary of the improvisation, or the vocabulary of the meters or of the beat. And so there's different beats, there's different meters, there's different rhythms, there's different pitches, there's different keys. I mean, all of that is there for the taking. And we can also play with form if we really wanted to. I mean, it's just like, it's all there. And so it's now just trying to get to it. I believe that because the body is forced engaged, I'm not just wiggling my finger on my light keyboard, but I am deeply on multiple layers, having to feel beat, having to feel meter, and then having to arc, in this case, the 3-beat phrase, or the 6-beat phrase, which is not intuitive to everyone, to try to make musical sense, harmonic sense in a 3 pattern. Which of course could be a 4 pattern or a 5 pattern or what have you. All of that are really great attentions. And we'll find, just as Veronica mentioned, the flute student who can or can't intuit how to move their lip. We will easily find students who intuit the 2-bar phrase in 3/4. I don't know, you told me to be in 3/4, and it just comes out, and I cadence every 6 beats, and it fits beautifully. And then we'll easily encounter adult students with years of musical training, outstanding musical training, who can't find the groove of a 3 pattern, and will end up phrasing every 4 beats, even though their arm swung every 3. Or whose lower body is actually not feeling engaged with their upper body or their singing body. That kind of dissociation, unintentional dissociation, is common, super common. And so the first things that we're doing is trying to get me in sync with myself, and then we're looking to be in sync with each other, which is maybe me at the piano, or them with their partner, or we with our chamber colleagues. And so, and there you go. We're at time. It's 3:01. Veronica, anything to wrap us up?
See you this Saturday or Sunday all of you Saturday, because it's all Monday for us, I believe. I don't know where Kathleen is. Kathleen, what part of the world are you in?
I'm in Pittsburgh, actually.
Gotcha. All right. So see you all this Saturday for Jack's class. And if anybody from Asia watches this on video, then that class is on this Sunday for you.
Yep.
Yeah, that's our next event.
Thank you. If you haven't signed up for Jack's class, you can do that through virtualdalcroze.org. The meetups are free. The master classes cost just a little bit, and help underwrite the long form teaching of those master teachers.
And we have a Vietnamese colleague presenting on the next meetup, March 29th or 28th. So cool connection from around the world.
All right, no shortage of fun things to do. Thank you all so much for showing up and for joining in. If there's anything I can do for you or for any of our later viewers, reach out, and we hope to see you at a future VDM event. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
I was unable